The body knows before the mind is ready to admit it. Sometimes you are sitting across from someone you care about, or lying awake next to them, or reading a message that should have made you feel relieved, and instead, your stomach tightens. Your chest feels too small. Your throat closes. Nothing dramatic is happening. No one is shouting. No one has betrayed you in a way you can point to and explain in one sentence. And still, your body is already stepping back. That is the part that confuses people. Because the mind wants evidence. The mind wants a reason. The mind wants a clean story with a beginning, a middle, and an ending. But the body does not wait for a courtroom. The body notices tone, timing, distance, pressure, the way your shoulders rise when their name appears on the screen, the way your breathing changes when they reach for you, the way a smile can look warm and still feel wrong. And if you have ever felt that strange inner recoil, you know how lonely it can be. You start asking yourself if you are overthinking, if you were being unfair, if you were too sensitive, if this is just fear from the past, just anxiety, just old wounds trying to sabotage something good. So you stay. You keep trying. You let the mind argue with the body. You tell yourself to relax, to give it more time, to be open, to not ruin something before it even has a chance. But the body keeps its own record. It remembers what the mind is trying to edit out. It remembers the tiny moments when you felt yourself disappear in the presence of another person. The moment your expression changed and they did not notice. The moment you said yes when everything in you meant no. The moment you felt the need to explain, soften, perform, adapt, or become easier to hold. The body remembers the first time your peace was disturbed and you called it chemistry. It remembers the first time your boundaries were crossed and you called it intimacy. That is why this kind of rejection can feel so unsettling, because it does not arrive as a clear decision. It arrives as a sensation, a heaviness, a nausea, a tension in the jaw, a sudden fatigue, a desire to leave the room, a strange flatness where affection used to live. And the mind says, but this person has not done anything terrible. Yes, that may be true. And still, something in you is already saying no. This is where many people misunderstand the body. They think it only reacts to obvious danger. But the body is often reacting to a deeper truth the ego has not yet organized into language. The body notices mismatch. It notices when your outward yes is covering an inner no. It notices when you are trying to build closeness on top of self-betrayal. It notices when your nervous system is being asked to stay open in a place that does not feel safe enough to soften. That does not always mean the other person is evil. It does not always mean they are wrong for you in every possible way. It means the relationship is touching something ancient in you, and your system is responding before your story catches up. Carl Jung would have understood that this is not just about the other person. It is about what gets activated in the unconscious when a certain kind of bond appears. Sometimes, we are not reacting only to who is standing in front of us. We are reacting to an image, a pattern, a complex, an old emotional field that has been waiting for a familiar shape to return. And that is where the body becomes honest. Because the body does not care about your ideal image of the relationship. It does not care how beautiful the potential looks on paper. It does not care how much time you have invested, or how much you wanted this to work, or how embarrassed you would feel if you walked away now. The body cares about congruence. It cares about whether your inner world and outer reality can meet without forcing each other into silence. Some relationships do not fail loudly. They fail through slow, internal contraction. At first, you may not even notice it. You just begin to feel more tired after speaking with them, more alert, more careful, more like you are monitoring yourself from the inside. You rehearse responses before saying them. You read between the lines more than you listen to the words. You feel the need to stay pleasant, to stay attractive, to stay calm, to stay available. And the strange thing is, the more effort you make to preserve the connection, the less alive you feel inside it. That is not a small detail. That is the body telling the truth. A healthy bond may challenge you, but it does not make you abandon your own center just to remain in the room. A healthy bond may bring fear, but it does not require you to shrink to survive it. A healthy bond may stir old wounds, but it does not ask you to confuse unease with devotion. The deeper wound often begins much earlier than this relationship. Sometimes your body rejects the relationship because it has already learned, through earlier experiences, what happens when you stay too long in a place that asks you to become smaller. Maybe you grew up around emotional unpredictability. Maybe love was tied to performance. Maybe attention came with pressure. Maybe you learned that being chosen meant being useful, quiet, agreeable, or easy to manage. In that case, your psyche may have built a persona around being the one who adapts, the good one, the understanding one, the patient one, the one who can hold it together. And that persona can become so polished that even you forget it is a mask. Jung used the word persona for the social face we wear, the version of ourselves we present to be accepted, protected, or loved. A persona is not fake in the simple sense. It is necessary. We all need one. But when the persona becomes too rigid, it starts to live in your place. You stop asking what you feel and start asking what will keep the peace. You stop asking what is true and start asking what will preserve the bond. You stop listening to the body because the persona has become more important than the self. Then one day, the body rebels. Not because it is dramatic, because it is tired. Tired of smiling when something feels off. Tired of being available when your energy is gone. Tired of calling confusion normal. Tired of pretending that your discomfort is just a phase. Tired of living in a relationship where your nervous system never fully settles. This is why the body can reject a relationship before the mind does. The mind is still negotiating. The body has already counted the cost. And here is the part that hurts. Sometimes you do not want to leave because the relationship is bad. You want to stay because it is familiar. That is a very different kind of trap. Familiarity can feel like safety, even when it is actually repetition. The unconscious is drawn to what it recognizes, not always to what is good for it. This is one reason people return to dynamics that leave them depleted. The psyche knows the shape of the wound, and because it knows it, it mistakes it for home. That is not weakness. That is how complexes work. A complex is like an emotional knot in the unconscious. It forms around early experiences, unmet needs, repeated disappointments, and the meanings we attach to them. Later in life, when a situation touches that knot, the reaction can feel bigger than the present moment. Suddenly, you are not only responding to this person, you are responding to every time you felt unseen, every time you had to earn affection, every time your body said no, and your life said, keep going. So the relationship starts to feel charged in a way you cannot explain. You may even feel ashamed of your own reaction. You may think, why can't I just be normal? Why can't I enjoy what I have? Why do I feel so drained by something that should make me happy? But the body is not trying to ruin your happiness. It is trying to protect your wholeness. And that distinction matters. Because when the body rejects the relationship, it is often not rejecting love itself. It is rejecting the cost of losing yourself in order to keep love. That is a painful sentence, because many people have built their entire relational life around that sacrifice. They learn to call self-abandonment devotion. They learn to call anxiety passion. They learn to call shrinking compromise. They learn to call silence maturity. And because the language sounds noble, they do not notice how much of themselves they are giving away. The body notices. The body notices when you keep saying yes while your chest tightens. The body notices when you feel relief the moment plans get canceled. The body notices when you dread the conversation before it happens. The body notices when you are more peaceful alone than you are with the person who is supposed to be your comfort. That relief is information. A lot of people ignore that relief because they think love should feel intense. But intensity is not the same as alignment. Intensity can come from projection, from uncertainty, from emotional hunger, from the old chase for validation. Alignment feels different. It may be quieter, it may be less theatrical, but it does not require your nervous system to keep paying a hidden tax. And here is where Jung becomes important again. Because projection can make a relationship feel larger than it is. You may be seeing not just the person, but the promise they seem to carry. The promise of repair. The promise of being chosen. The promise that this time, the wound will finally close. In that moment, the other person is no longer just themselves. They become a screen for your unconscious longing. That is why the body can react before the mind does. The body senses the gap between the real person and the projected image. It senses when your soul is reaching for meaning while your system is detecting threat. It senses the split, and the split creates exhaustion. You are trying to love who they are while also loving who you hoped they would become. You are trying to respond to what they say while also responding to what you fear underneath it. You are trying to stay present while your body keeps stepping into the future, bracing for disappointment. So the question is not only, do they love me? The deeper question is, what part of me is waking up in this connection? Because sometimes what you call attraction is actually an old complex reaching for resolution. Sometimes what you call chemistry is your unconscious saying, this feels familiar, and familiar feels urgent. Sometimes what you call a strong bond is your body recognizing a pattern before your mind has the courage to name it. That is why so many people feel confused after a relationship begins to disturb them. They cannot tell whether the discomfort is intuition or fear, and often it is both. Intuition does not always arrive as certainty. Sometimes it arrives as a physical no. Fear can also be present, of course, especially if you have been hurt before. But fear tends to be noisy and circular. It tells the same story over and over. Intuition is often quieter. It is not trying to convince you. It is simply withdrawing your energy from what does not fit. You may notice that your body starts to resist in subtle ways first. You delay replies. You avoid plans. You feel less excited by their attention. You become irritated by things that used to seem charming. You stop wanting the same closeness. Or you feel yourself longing for distance without understanding why. Do not rush to label that as coldness. Sometimes, what looks like coldness is the first honest boundary your body has ever been allowed to express. That can be frightening, especially if you are someone who has built identity around being warm, available, generous, and easy to love. Because once your body begins to reject the relationship, you may worry that you are becoming hard, damaged, or impossible. You may fear that if you listen to this instinct, you will lose something precious. You may even feel guilty for no longer feeling what you think you should feel. But guilt is not always a moral signal. Sometimes guilt is just the echo of an old role losing its grip. If you were trained to be the person who absorbs discomfort for everyone else, then setting a boundary can feel wrong even when it is right. If your persona was built around tolerance, then your body saying no can feel like betrayal. If you were praised for being easy, then your nervous system asking for space can feel like failure. This is where a lot of people abandon themselves again. They override the body to protect the image of the relationship. They stay because they do not want to appear difficult. They stay because they want to be the kind of person who can make it work. They stay because leaving would force them to admit that something was off all along. But the body already knows, and the longer you ignore it, the louder it becomes. Sometimes it becomes anxiety, sometimes insomnia, sometimes sudden irritation, sometimes numbness, sometimes a deep sadness that seems to come from nowhere. Sometimes physical symptoms that are hard to explain but impossible to dismiss. The unconscious has many ways of speaking when the ego refuses to listen. And no, this does not mean every discomfort is a sign to leave. Life is more complex than that. Real closeness can be challenging. Real intimacy can expose fear. Real growth can feel uncomfortable. But there is a difference between the discomfort of growth and the discomfort of self-erasure. One expands you, the other empties you. The body usually knows the difference first. Think about the room where you feel most yourself. Your breathing changes there. Your shoulders drop. Your face softens. You do not have to calculate your words. You do not have to perform a version of calm. You do not have to keep checking whether you are too much or not enough. There is room for your actual presence. That is what the body recognizes as safe enough. Now think about the relationship that makes you brace. Even if the person is kind, even if they mean well, even if they have not done anything obviously wrong, your system may still tighten because it cannot find enough room to be fully alive. That is the signal. Not drama, not hysteria. Signal. The body is not asking for perfection. It is asking for truth. And truth can be very simple. Sometimes it is, I do not feel like myself here. Sometimes it is, I keep losing energy after contact. Sometimes it is, I am always adjusting and never resting. Sometimes it is, I am more loyal to the possibility of this relationship than to the reality of how I feel in it. That last one is hard to admit, because possibility is seductive. Possibility lets you keep the dream alive. It lets you avoid grief. It lets you imagine that if you just wait long enough, explain well enough, love well enough, the discomfort will dissolve and the relationship will become what you hoped it was from the beginning. But the body lives in the present, not in potential, and the present is where the truth sits. Sometimes the body rejects a relationship because it is recognizing that the connection is asking you to live through a persona instead of through yourself. Jung's idea of the self is not about ego, pride, or self-image. It is the deeper organizing center of the psyche, the part that seeks wholeness. When you move away from it too long, life begins to feel fragmented. You may still function, you may still smile, you may still show up, but something essential is no longer participating. That is often what people mean when they say, I can't explain it, but it doesn't feel right. They are not failing to explain. They are describing the moment the self begins to resist a false arrangement. And the body is often the first messenger. It is worth sitting with that, because many people try to solve this kind of discomfort by becoming more logical. They make pros and cons lists. They ask friends for opinions. They look for signs. They try to find proof that the relationship is worth the unease. But if the core issue lives in the body, then more mental argument is not always the answer. Sometimes the real question is not, how do I make myself stay? Sometimes the question is, why do I need to override myself to remain here? That question can change everything, because once you ask it sincerely, you stop treating your discomfort as an inconvenience and start treating it as intelligence. You stop seeing your no as a flaw and start seeing it as information. You stop trying to silence the body and begin to understand what it is protecting. Maybe it is protecting your dignity. Maybe it is protecting your energy. Maybe it is protecting the part of you that has been ignored for too long. Maybe it is protecting you from turning love into a place where you disappear. And if that is true, then the body is not your enemy. It is your ally. The tragedy is that many people only discover this after they have spent years ignoring themselves. They become so skilled at staying that they forget what leaving feels like. They become so practiced at adapting that they no longer know what alignment feels like. They become so loyal to the relationship that they become disloyal to their own inner life. But the moment the body begins to reject the relationship, there is still a choice. You do not have to make the perfect choice immediately. You do not have to end everything in one dramatic gesture. You do not have to prove anything to anyone. You only have to stop calling self-abandonment love. You only have to stop treating your discomfort as a misunderstanding that must be corrected. You only have to begin telling the truth to yourself, and truth often begins quietly. Maybe it sounds like, I need to slow down. Maybe it sounds like, I need space. Maybe it sounds like, I am not available for this level of pressure. Maybe it sounds like, I need to pay attention to how my body feels after we speak. Maybe it sounds like, I am allowed to leave what drains me, even if it looks fine from the outside. That is not selfish. That is the beginning of individuation. Individuation, in Jungian language, is the process of becoming more whole, more yourself, less ruled by unconscious patterns and inherited roles. It does not mean becoming isolated or perfect. It means your life starts to belong to you again. Your choices begin to come from your center rather than from fear, habit, or approval seeking. And often, the first sign that individuation is happening is resistance. The body refuses what the old self would have endured. The psyche no longer cooperates with the script. The mask becomes heavy. The old compromise becomes impossible to keep wearing. That can feel like loss. But sometimes loss is the beginning of honesty. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself in the comments or in your journal. My body is not betraying me. It is telling me the truth. Because maybe that is the sentence you needed to hear years ago. Maybe you needed to know that peace is not something you have to earn by tolerating what hurts. Maybe you needed to know that a real bond does not require you to disappear in order to belong. Maybe you needed to know that your discomfort is not proof that you are broken. It may be proof that something in you is waking up. And waking up is rarely neat. It can feel like grief. It can feel like confusion. It can feel like being disloyal to an old version of yourself that survived by saying yes too often. But survival is not the same as living. And the body, when it is healthy enough to speak, often knows when survival mode is no longer enough. That is why you may feel the relationship in your bones before you can explain it in words. Your body is not being dramatic. It is reading the room. It is reading the cost. It is reading the mismatch between what you say and what you can actually bear. So, do not rush past that feeling. Sit with it. Respect it. Let it have a voice. The mind may still need time. That is okay. The mind can catch up later. But do not force the body to sign a contract it has already refused. Because once you stop betraying yourself, something subtle begins to change. Your breathing deepens. Your shoulders settle. Your thoughts become clearer. You may still feel sadness, and that sadness matters, but it is no longer mixed with the constant strain of pretending. You begin to understand that the relationship was not just asking for your love, it was also asking for your silence, your adaptation, your confusion, your emotional labor. And maybe that was the real problem all along. Not that you were incapable of love, but that love had started to cost too much of yourself. The body knew before the mind did. And now that you know, you do not have to keep negotiating with a feeling that has already spoken. You can listen. You can slow down. You can step back. You can let the truth be inconvenient and still be true. You do not need to force a connection to survive your fear of loss. You do not need to stay in a story just because you have already invested in it. You do not need to call every ache a lesson and every warning a test. Sometimes the body rejects the relationship because it sees what the heart still hopes to deny. And if you honor that rejection, you are not becoming cold. You are becoming truthful. You are becoming someone who no longer confuses exhaustion with devotion. Someone who no longer calls self-erasure love. Someone who is willing to let the body lead when the mind is still making excuses. That is how wholeness begins, not with certainty, with listening, not with force, with recognition, not with a perfect answer, with the courage to admit, something in me already knows. And if you can stay with that knowing, even gently, even imperfectly, you may discover that the relationship was never the only thing at stake. What was really being asked of you was whether you would keep abandoning yourself for the sake of being chosen. The body has already answered. Now, it is your turn to believe it.